With that house exploding last night and the man firing 30 to 40 flares into the air, I started thinking, we haven't had a good heart-to-heart conversation about civil war in a long time. And there's actually a big story that one of our members over at Timcast.com brought up, and that is Texas preparing to vote to leave the United States. And so we have these two big stories. Of course, I think the core of this is going to be more about what's happening with this country and where we're heading into 2024, which is, look, guys, I'm hanging out at the old poker table like I do on the weekends. And I'm asking people what they think, or, everyone was someone else brought up politics. I usually don't talk about that stuff. You just talk about playing poker. But, somebody basically the conversation is what's going to happen in 2024? Who's going to win? How's it going to play out? And the general consensus was there's no election, which I find funny because Roseanne on Timcast IRL said there wasn't going to be an election, for which Michael Malice challenged her to a bet of $1,000, and they shook on it. The question is, what does that mean by no election? Well, everyone basically agreed. No matter what happens, there's going to be 10,000 lawsuits before the election and 10,000 lawsuits after the election. And the likelihood is that after the votes are counted, we may end up with something like, I think, what was it, 1876? Year and a half states presenting different electoral counts. And that is basically what happened in 2020. Now, I say basically because there were electoral votes certified by the governors, but the state legislatures were challenging them or wanted to. And the argument made by the Trump supporters that Mike Pence should have returned those vote counts to the state legislature to ask them whether or not they approved of the way the election was run, because that is their purview. The Constitution says the state legislatures determine how elections are run. The results are presented to the governor signs it, sends them off to the electoral college, or but to the to Congress to certify the vote. Well, didn't happen. So what's going to happen this time around? Probably something very, very similar. And now, before we even get to that point, we're hearing that Texas is one step closer to leaving the United States. Yes, they've obtained the amount of signatures required to get a referendum on whether or not Texas should assert itself as an independent nation. So I want to go over this, but I do want to give you a quick update on the house that exploded. And the reason why I'm not doing a full segment on the exploding house is because I don't think it's actually anything. I mean, it's a big story. It's kind of scary. It's kind of crazy, but I don't think it's necessarily any kind of political conflict. But we saw this last night. An Arlington home exploded in a gigantic fireball, raising it to the ground after a suspect inside set off flares. The story is actually crazy, but it is quite simple. A guy started firing flares into the air, 30 or 40 of them. I believe the neighbors were evacuated because of this. I hope so. Then the police came trying to coax the person out. Reportedly, they fired non-lethals to break the windows. This guy opened fire on the police. And then eventually, when the police were trying to enter the home exploded. It was a duplex. So other people, lost their house as well. And this is why I always say, people are always, I know people who live in townhomes, and I'm like, I ain't never going to do that. I will not buy a house, that's attached to someone else's house with the same architecture. Because what if they're a crackpot and they set a fire and then you lose your property? That's the stupidest thing ever. But this is what happens here. This guy goes nuts, blows up his house. The people who live next to him, they lose their house too. Now, I guess the reality here is, look, the guy was crazy. That's it. Reports on who this guy is are that, he was mentally unwell and believed crazy things. He wasn't left or right or anything like that. But in seeing this story in Arlington, a lot of people, of course, are questioning what the motivations were, and jokes about evidence that would lead to the arrest of Hillary Clinton aside. I think that's generally it. But we did have this story. Texas may secede from the Union. I think it's very, very unlikely. But the sentiment is actually interesting, and there is a large percentage of people in this country who actually want to secede from the Union. Changing America back in 2021, this is The Hill, said shocking poll finds many Americans now want to secede from the United States. Well, okay. Let's start with Texas. What's going on over in Texas? Now, a lot of people are arguing that when Texas joined the Union, they reserved the right to secede outside of any other normal Union agreement other states would have. Texas, this is fascinating, was an independent nation. And when Texas was offered to join the Union, the offer was to create 5 states. Not just Texas, but Texas could be broken up into 5 different states that would each join the Union. And they said, nah, we'll keep Texas the same. One unified body. It would have been very interesting if Texas did join as 5 different states. It would imagine how the vote count would be held today. It would be substantially more conservative. Newsweek says advocates for Texas's secession from the United States believe they're on the verge of scoring a crucial victory. And of course, this is from last Friday. The Texas Republican Party's executive committee is set to vote over the weekend on which ballot propositions voters will decide during the Republican primary elections in March 2024. One measure would ask Republican voters, quote, should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation? Ahead of the vote, the Texas Nationalist Movement, an organization that supports Texas's independence from the U.S., warned the GOP they have enough signatures to force a vote on the question. So we're not quite at the point of vote. They are preparing to make that vote. I believe we have a tweet here from the Texas Nationalist Movement saying the Texit petition has over 100,000 signatures. Now it's time to get Texit on the ballot this March. Yeah, there's a long way to go. And this is, I don't know, probably wishful thinking for people who are wanting Texas to secede. But, I got to be honest, I'm reading some of these articles and I agree with some of these activists. If Texas were to secede, the net worth, in my opinion, of Texans would skyrocket. I really do think so. I can make it really simple for you. No more U.S. regulation on Texas labor and manufacturing and work, and they would instantly absorb tons of companies. People would instantly just be like, if we open up or operate out of Texas, the tax rate will be dramatically lower. And there you go. Of course, then you'd have, I guess, tariffs or something on importing goods into the United States, whatever. Texas nationalists have for years pushed for a referendum on Texas secession, despite the fact there is no provision for a state to secede from the U.S. Constitution. That doesn't need to be. The state seceded from Mexico in 1836 and spent 9 years as its own nation before becoming a U.S. state. It also seceded from the Union in 1861 before being readmitted following the end of the Civil War in 1870. Now, the fascinating thing with Texas in the Civil War was that Texas didn't join the South because they were ideologically aligned. Texas joined the South because they were geographically locked out. Crazy, right? It's true. The position on Texas was they're surrounded by Confederate states in every direction. And so if the Confederacy, at the time, there's no war, these states were like, we are no longer the Union. Texas is like, well, what are we supposed to do? We are locked out from the Union. We can't be in a union and have this gap between the states. So they were just like, I guess we're with the South. Didn't work out so well. In June of this year, our organization launched a petition campaign under the Texas Election Code, the section 172088. The section allows voters by petition to place a question on a party's primary ballot. In short, by collecting 97,709 signatures and submitting them with a filing deadline on December 11th, we could actually bypass the SREC's ballot proposition process and compel the party to place the question on the ballot. I want to stress, it's a primary ballot. This is not an official referendum in the state to actually secede. Newsweek reached out to the Texas Republican Party. If the question makes the primary ballot and passes, it would not be legally binding, nor would it mean Texas is actually seceding from the U.S. Still, it would be a key victory for secession advocates, who critics view as a fringe belief that would face significant hurdles in a general election. I don't agree. I'm not convinced they would actually win, but I do not agree. Take a look at this story from just a few weeks ago. Texas secessionists feel more emboldened than ever. I love these quotes. No taxes or Fauci's, no speed zones or toll roads, no liberals, no gun laws, no windmills, no poor people, a separate currency, stock market, and global depository, complete control of our own imaginary policy, world-class college football, a farewell to regulators, and unthinkable, unimaginable wealth. Oh, wow. We are going to be so rich. We're going to be rich. We're going to be rich. We are going to be rich. Kept saying it. As soon as we declare independence, we are going to be wealthy. I personally believe that our personal GDP will double in 5 to 7 years. I agree. I do. And it's really simple. The federal government says you can't do this. You can't do that. You get rid of that. And people in Texas are going to be like, drill, baby, drill. And the people who live in Texas are going to reap the benefits of that. Not to mention all taxation would go to Texas instead of the federal government. So Texas could functionally just be like, all right, right now you make $500,000 a year. You're giving a third of that to the federal government. Texas doesn't take that much. Texas could do a compromise where they're like, well, everyone's taxes are going down because we are declaring independence. We are raising our income tax up slightly. So if you're normally paying 35, you're now going to pay 22%, which is an increase from what Texas takes and a decrease from your overall taxes. So your taxes will go down substantially and revenue for Texas will go up substantially. Now that is going to dramatically change things. But let me tell you, a lot of people say, I know civil war is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't think that's the case. Al Jazeera published this op-ed in September of 2023. Sorry, Trumpers, there won't be a U.S. civil war for 2024. For 2024? I don't know what that means, but probably right. Civil war, if it happens, will happen for other reasons. But how about this? From just yesterday, Dick Durbin, United States Senator. We talked about this last night. Did you see it? Dick Durbin is calling for illegal immigrants to be enlisted into the army. Okay. Now I'll break it down for you. Let's say you live in Ohio or you live in Western Pennsylvania. Good, hardworking American. Okay. You just want to get by. You want your kids to go to school. You want to be able to have a cheeseburger on the weekends or whatever you eat during the week. You want to hang out with your friends and your family and have a good time and survive. You're not asking for much. You don't want to rule the world. You're just trying to live. Well, one day you are headed to the local grocery store to purchase some ground beef. But unfortunately for you, there is a sign that says you're not allowed to buy ground beef. You are barred from entry. Climate change and whatever. And you say, wait, why can't I? Other people are buying ground beef. Well, they've limited who can buy beef how often, and you are above your allotment. And so you begin to protest and say, no, I have the money. If I have the money to buy it, I should be able to buy ground beef. And then all of a sudden, some guy walks up, doesn't speak English, doesn't care, and he starts yelling at you, move. And you try talking, he says, no English, move. And then you start arguing. All of a sudden, there's 3 or 4 guys, none of them speak English. And then next thing you know, they're beating you. Riots break out, protests break out over restrictions and lockdowns. Not necessarily as hard lockdowns like COVID, but there's protests. How about this? Guy goes to the grocery store to buy ground beef, is barred from entry because of some lottery system where they determined that climate change, so you can't buy your beef, but you can pick up the cricket if you'd like. Dude says, look, I've got money. I want to buy ground beef. A fight breaks out. Someone in law enforcement, a non-citizen who was placed there because Illinois is doing this, kills the guy. Not that he was trying to, but he does. Like that Somali migrant in Minnesota who killed that woman. It's a long story, but it was like a traffic stop and he just kills her. And it was like shocking because it was a minor traffic violation. Shot her and killed her. So this has already happened. Let's say protests break out. The government says, look, we got a bunch of angry protesters in the streets. What do? They dispatch law enforcement, National Guard, and the majority are comprised of non-citizens. And then comes the big question. When ordered to open fire on the insurrection, as they'd call it, would these soldiers do it? Would American military men and women open fire? They're not citizens. They're from another country. They don't care. Let's make it crazier. In Staten Island, they bust in a bunch of illegal immigrants into this neighborhood. And the locals came out in protest. And the police beat and arrested the local residents. These were American cops. They beat and arrested the residents who did not want the state to bring in non-citizens and steal their money. That's what happened. So, yeah. You want to talk about what could happen? Imagine how bad it is already with American citizen police officers willing to bash women in the face with truncheons because those women said, do not bring these non-citizens into our community. And the cops smiled and laughed and just started mercilessly beating these people. These cops are evil, by the way. I'm not saying all cops are evil. I don't like the ACAP garbage. But because we need the police to actually defend these communities, but they don't. They're an occupying force. What happens when you replace the National Guard with non-citizens? Not only are they likely not to speak English, they don't care. It's one thing if you can try to appeal to a citizen of your own country to stop doing this to you, and they don't. It's another thing when the powers that be instruct non-citizens to open fire on local American citizens. You're facing down a foreign army. Sorry, that's the reality. Oh, they can slap the American flag on it, but these are not U.S. citizens brandishing the weapons and aiming them at you. And that's where we're headed. So when Dick Durbin is saying, do you know what the recruiting numbers are at the Army, Navy, and the Air Force? They can't reach their quotas each month. They can't find enough people to join. And there are those who are undocumented who want the chance to serve and risk their lives for this country. Should we give them the chance? I think we should. In my state of Illinois and Chicago and in rural areas downstate, we're holding our breath hoping that we can keep hospitals open. You know why? We don't have enough medical personnel. And yet there are people all around this world who have medical credentials as doctors and nurses and skilled technicians who want to come to the U.S., but we don't give them the chance. I think we're headed in this direction. I think this is exactly where it's going. Now, the imaginative conservative says the 3 reasons why a national divorce would shatter America. They say, well, they're not really good. There's more than 3. But I bring this up only to point out sentiment for national divorce is not universal. The Washington Post writes, who are the Americans who support secession? After Marjorie Taylor Greene proposed this is back in September, Philip Bump wrote this. He says, when she argued on September 11th that states should consider secession, it attracted much less attention than similar outbursts, blah, blah, blah. 1 in 5 Americans support the concept of secession. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot because you would need substantially more than that and in a specific area. Texas is going to need 51%, probably more if we're being honest, to actually vote and declare independence. I don't see it as being likely, at least right now. But let's get to the meat and potatoes here, my friends. Let's jump a year ahead. It's 2024, December 5th. The election results are in question. Now, the media has reported, for the most part, that Joe Biden or Gavinism, or who knows, the Democrat, has won. Several other outlets have reported that Donald Trump has won. Well, how can that be? Well, because reporting on TV is not unified. I mean, it's not official. So what happens is you get, for the most part, cable television saying the Democrat has won and Trump loses again. But then online, you see something different. Many large and prominent media outlets, let's say Real Clear Politics, which is not establishment. You've got The Hill, which is more middle of the road, and Newsweek saying Donald Trump is the winner. Well, how can that be? I mean, Newsweek, they're mainstream. They get ragged on all the time. Yeah, but Newsweek does run it a little bit in the middle. So MSNBC, of course, says we're projecting the winner is going to be Democrat. But then you have other outlets online saying the opposite. All of a sudden, nobody knows. This happened with Fox in 2020 when they called Arizona before the results were actually in. And everyone was like, whoa, you can't call it just yet. There's way too much in question. And they did. But take a look at Arizona with Kerry Lake. The voting machines weren't working. The ballots were printed incorrectly. I love this. When I point out and I say they're not going to have, some state is going to print out ballots and have Donald Trump not on the ballot. People are like, the ballots have to be printed 90 days in advance. That can't happen. Oh, look at Arizona. Printed in advance? Well, certainly not in Arizona, I guess, because the ballots were printed wrong. Okay, maybe when it comes to Trump's name, you can't overlook that. The ballots may have an improper barcode, which jams them up. So let's play this game. It is election day, 2024. And in Arizona or Colorado, several states, Georgia perhaps. Colorado not so much an important swing state, but let's just say in Georgia or Arizona, we get another one of these problems. And people are reporting that their ballots are not being scanned properly. Uh-oh. You see, people might tolerate a governorship race, but they were not happy with it, and the challenge is ongoing. In Georgia, there's rumors that voting records were destroyed, and the courts are ordering them to be released. Now they're gone. I think if that happens, Arizona potentially too, that should nullify the election, no matter how. I don't care how long it's been. I don't care if it was 100 years ago. You declare it null. And if that person is still in office, they're no longer in office, and the position is vacated, and there must be a special election. Because we have to know who was voted in. So let's say this. There's an error, and then you get a Democrat Secretary of State who says, no, the error is meaningless. Our state goes to Democrat. The state legislature says, no way. We did not have an election run properly, and immediately votes to bar the electoral results or the vote count. Democrats try ramming it through the Electoral College anyway. Republicans object, saying, and they bring in someone from Arizona saying in the congressional chambers, we did not have this election. These are not the official results. Something like that. Maybe. 2020 was wild enough. They wanted Mike Pence to kick back these vote counts. And you know what? He should have. Why? He should have in the respect that the state legislatures demanded it. And I'm not saying they all did. In the instance where a state, like Georgia perhaps, said, rules were changed by the governor and we need to review this process and resolve litigation, Mike Pence should have said, I can't count this. Richard Nixon famously counted votes that were not certified back in, what was this, 1961, I think it was. Was it 61? I can't remember the exact. No, was it? Let me check. 1961, right? Make sure I get this one right. 1961 electoral vote count. I believe it was 61, right? Yeah. Right. Okay, so yes, this was in 1960 was the election. So in 61, they were counting the ballots, and this is where there was an issue with Hawaii. Nixon decided to read the votes, to count the votes that were not certified. Precedent is there. So what happens? A lot of hypotheticals. I'll give you one. Simple solution is the vote happens and that's it. You say, and the winner is Democrat. And then everyone goes, no, and they complain. And then, that's it. Seriously, that seems like the more likely outcome. Well, you know what? I'm not sure it takes the plurality. The majority. It may be the plurality. It's perhaps the largest probability is that the election is held, they say someone won, and that's it, we move on. But there are numerous other scenarios all surrounding the idea that no matter what happens, nobody will accept the vote count. It's entirely possible this time around, we're not going to have a proper count. Now, of course, look, it's Kamala Harris. So let's imagine Donald Trump wins. Oh boy, this one's going to be fun. Let's say it is Biden and Harris. And Donald Trump wins. But there are several states questioning the results of the election, and they cite Republicans in 2020, and then they demand that Kamala not count the votes. And Kamala, of course, being a scumbag, says, okay, I'm not counting these. And she refuses. Now, it'd still go to state delegations in which I believe that would result in a Republican victory, but she refuses to count, which stops the process, and now it's been several months, and we do not know who the president is going to be. I don't know where that goes. I don't think it immediately leads to civil war or anything like that. But I'm telling you right now, it does not look like we are going to have a clean run through of 2024. You probably already have 10,000 lawsuits on each side being prepared, several already being filed. You already have claims of voter fraud. You already have calls for secession. And you mean to tell me that if we go back to 2021, when 1 in 5 people in the United States wanted to secede, according to this poll, 37%, a third of citizens, according to the Hill, 1/3, and 37, so actually a little bit more than that. You think that number hasn't increased? I think it has. I think it's probably much higher. Among Republicans, it's 50%. Then it jumped to 66% in June. This is several years ago. Where do you think that number is right now? Marjorie Taylor Greene called for a national divorce. I'm pretty sure that sentiment among Republicans is very high. and sentiment among Democrats is high enough. So what do you think's going to happen come 1 year from now? I think I won't be sitting in this room. We'll be sitting in the news studio, but I'll be sitting in a room just like this one. And I will be saying to you, we still do not know who the president is. Of course. From now until then, there is a wide range of variables that could take place. Donald Trump could get abducted by aliens. Joe Biden could have a lizard person burst from his skin and reveal that we've actually been ruled by reptilians. Now, those are on the lower end of likelihood, sure. But it could be something more realistic, like Joe Biden suffers a heart attack, or Kamala Harris resigns. I mean, who knows? Not that the more likely thing is Biden suffering some kind of ailment. Gavin Newsom steps in, is appointed by the DNC because they can't do a primary. Joe Biden has a medical episode barring him from being able to run. And then, not legally, but like physically. And then Gavin Newsom steps up. And then they just say, oh, look, Gavin Newsom won. I don't know. I have no idea. But I tell you, if a Democrat wins in 2024, I believe it's bedlam. Because right now, everybody hates the Democratic Party. You got the young people complaining about Palestine. You've got the older people complaining about the economy. And there is no Democratic candidate who's going to unify these groups. So even if Newsom won, now you've got the young vote, the pro-Palestine group. They're marching through the streets screaming Intifada. They are not going to accept this. And then you've got the Trump supporters who are not going to accept it. Now, let's say a Democrat does win, or a Republican wins, sorry. Then Trump wins, the same pro-Palestine group, and now the liberals. No matter which way you slice it, this country is at odds with each other politically to an extreme degree. Perhaps the best course of action, and this is scary to say, but the reality is, Texas and other states just secede, and then there's no question of it. No one complains about who the president is because everyone just says we're going to do our own thing. I suppose all we can do is wait and see, so I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.